Hi everyone, Producer Pat here. Just a quick note about this week's show. The segment with Dr. Stuart Robbins ended up being, as is often the case when he's on the show, us asking him a lot of questions and him patiently taking the time to answer them. So that segment went quite a bit longer than we were expecting. We'll bring you the whole conversation. We're just going to do it in two parts. One part this week and one part next week. Enjoy the show.
This episode of The Reality Check is brought to you by HelloFresh. Forget takeout. HelloFresh delivers all the ingredients for delicious, healthy meals anyone can prepare at home in less than 30 minutes. And HelloFresh is giving our Canadian checkers 50% off their first order. Go to hellofresh.ca and use promo code REALITY50 to get 50% off your first order. That's hellofresh.ca, promo code REALITY50. This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for May 2nd, 2017, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, Cupoids?
Christina Roach.
Hello.
And producer Pat.
Hi everyone.
But not as usual, special guest, Stuart Robbins.
Ahoy hoy.
Thanks for joining us, Stuart.
Thanks for having me again. I was afraid I would never be allowed on again after last time.
Well, you're still on probation, but we're going to try something new, an Ask an Astronomer segment. And then I'm going to talk to you about duct tape. I know you've all been wondering about it, so I thought it was time to address those listener emails. But first, Adam is going to talk to us about Justin Trudeau and cupping.
Indeed, Darren. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, engages in cupping, a traditional form of medicine. This made headlines here in Canada over the past week. Shout out to Ken Milne, who brought this segment to our attention. I personally first noticed cupping in action when I was at a CrossFit competition near Toronto a couple of summers ago. I saw some competitors that had many identically sized marks on their skin, and this reminded me of a not-so-bright move I pulled off when I was about 12 years old. I used to do this thing where I would put a cup over my mouth and inhale so that just kind of held the cup there through pressure. That's science. And then one time while I was acting up in class in front of some friends, I inhaled as hard as I could because I thought it would be kind of funny, and a bunch of blood vessels burst around my mouth and on my chin, and it actually took a few days to clear up.
You created a partial vacuum.
Exactly. So unbeknownst to me, I was practicing a popular, ancient, and completely ineffective form of alternative medicine. It's used for many things, and generally it's used for pain relief, but it's also claimed to work for many other ailments like shingles, acne, facial paralysis, herpes, and cervical spondylosis, and many more things. So what exactly is this cupping that everyone's talking about? Cupping involves putting a glass cup against a person's skin and creating a partial vacuum or area of low pressure inside the cup. Traditionally, this was done by heating the cup, though modern methods use mechanical suction. If you want to be like really old school, you still do the heating thing. People still do it. So this sucks the blood to the skin, causing the circle-shaped marks we can see on Justin Trudeau or, in last year's Olympics, Michael Phelps's body. So there are two main types. There's wet cupping and dry cupping. Wet cupping is followed by piercing the skin, letting blood flow out, and dry cupping just leaves this sort of hickey shape. Wet cupping is basically a vampire sucking your blood. Dry cupping is sort of like teenagers making out. So much to say, it's basically traditional Chinese medicine, a particular brand I would characterize as being in the realm of pseudoscience. Following the recent March for Science, I thought that here in Canada we were privileged to have a Prime Minister who supports science. Our previous administration, like the current US president, had policies contrary to those justified by scientific evidence and sought to muzzle scientists working for the federal government. Following the recent election, this largely changed, and to see our Prime Minister using this kind of quackery is a bit disappointing. So we can ask ourselves, how frequently is this something he really does? The photo in question shows Justin Trudeau with his sleeves rolled up, with marks from cupping on his forearms. To say this is his usual style is a bit of an understatement. Every once in a while, I get a tear in the elbow on my long-sleeve dress shirts at work. As a result, I'll roll up my sleeves, and my coworkers joke that it makes me look like Justin Trudeau, who always has rolled up dress shirt tucked into his pants. So most of his photos going about his day or campaigning, he's seen doing that. Obviously, if he's going to be in the House of Commons or something, he's going to be wearing his nice suit.
What kind of workplace conditions are you having that you keep hurting your elbows enough to rip your shirts?
I cause friction on my desk when I use my mouse, so I have this problem where a lot of cheaper shirts, I guess, rip on the elbow. So there's some stores I won't get shirts from RW & Co anymore. It's just happened too frequently. But it's happened more than once.
Always on the right elbow?
And then always on the right elbow because I use my mouse. And then I get home and I do like a fake Incredible Hulk thing where I rip my shirt off and I go, it's funny.
Pixar, it didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say that. Took the words right out of my mouth.
I'll get a
Stuart.
video next time. So this is likely an intentional mix of formal and casual attire on his part to appeal to voters, but so much to say, if the Prime Minister had done cupping on this particular area before, this would likely not be the first time we've seen it, because he frequently has this part of his body exposed. Additionally, our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has a reputation for removing his shirt, or being en chest, as they like to say in French Canada. So sure, he doesn't pop his shirt off as frequently as an athlete at a CrossFit gym, but if he frequently had cupping marks on his chest or back and wasn't trying to hide it, it may have been something that at some point we would have seen in the past few years. Now, many news sources didn't feel the need to call out cupping as being pseudoscience, so here's a few quotes from articles talking about Justin Trudeau doing cupping. From The Star, and I quote, "Some people have these notions that it's bullshit, and it's just another way to make money. But it's been going on for thousands of years," he said. "It looks crazy, but it definitely does some work for me." A quote from the National Post. "In Chinese traditional medicine, an injury is seen as a blockage of qi, which literally means breath or air, but is used to mean something like a life-giving force that flows through the body. Cupping unblocks stagnated qi," Kreitzer said. "It's said to suck out flu, which in Chinese medicine we actually call wind." Kreitzer said, "We can help prevent a flu from getting worse, and at times, if we catch the flu soon enough, we can actually prevent a flu with the help of cups."
Yeah, that article was terrible.
Wow.
It's pretty bad. And in Maclean's, in 2012, a group of researchers at Beijing University of Chinese Medicine reviewed the literature from 1992 to 2010 and found the practice to be effective. Various diseases, conditions, in particular herpes zoster, acne, facial paralysis, and cervical spondylosis. The Beijing University of Chinese Medicine is a school teaching traditional Chinese medicine, which puts the research into question. Despite the fact that the Chinese government legitimizes this school and TCM in general, that doesn't mean that such practices are supported by scientific evidence. Most go on to talk about the general weaknesses of the evidence, but conclude usually that there isn't a strong effect, rather than mentioning that it's pure pseudoscience. Of the main Canadian news sources I saw covering it, only the Globe and Mail called out cupping as being pseudoscience and brought up that the current administration is supposed to be supporting science and scientists. So, what's the evidence for cupping? Stephen Novella had a great write-up for science-based medicine, which really gets into the truth of the matter. As with any type of medicine, we must consider the reasoning behind the concept to see if it has any merit. In this case, the basic idea behind cupping is based on pre-scientific nonsense. The original forms were simply bloodletting, a practice that has been largely abandoned, even while other methods of alternative medicine persist. Newer spins on the technique claim more sophisticated mechanisms, but this doesn't change that this fundamental concept was not born out of any knowledge of physiology and medicine, but rather based on ideas such as qi. This is over 1,000 years old or older, with a similar technique being practiced in ancient Egypt and ancient Greece, with some reports dating it back as far as 3000 BC. With no viable mechanism for this to work, we would need some pretty strong empirical evidence to support its use, but that evidence just doesn't exist. Edzard and Ernst did an analysis of the existing research and determined that there was possible and weak evidence of pain relief and no evidence of its efficiency for anything else. Basically, poor studies show it works, but better studies show little to no evidence for it working, and the evidence only weakly suggests effectiveness in things which are subject to placebo, such as pain relief. And this is typical of research for other types of medicine with no plausible mechanism, such as acupuncture and homeopathy. Bad research will show that something which doesn't do anything works, but it won't have strong conclusions supporting it. And also, it is considered to be effective by people in China, and research in China has shown positive outcomes similar to what we see with acupuncture. Cupping doesn't work. It's alternative medicine and pseudoscience. While it's bad to have a prime minister who practices cupping, Personal usage is far more palatable to me than an actual policy supporting it. The Prime Minister seems to be supporting science and scientists. Let's hope his policies on alternative medicine don't end up being too soft.
Ultimately what he does is his own business, what he chooses to do to his own person. Yeah. But it is really disappointing for a science-loving government to have someone at the helm who's got some kind of stake in an alternative therapy like this.
I mean, the truth is there is some sort of physiological manipulation. Yeah. And so I think that this falls in the category of not disproven, but unproven.
Yeah, I'd compare it to acupuncture. So people do use acupuncture. And as a placebo, it has a strong effect, because when you do physical manipulation, there's a stronger effect. You're convincing you that it works, but also there's there's the distraction of pain, right? So it can possibly have an equivalent effect to a nice massage or something like that, right?
I'm not sure if under scrutiny this placebo stuff would hold up over time. As I said in an earlier segment about placebo stuff, that most placebo effects are A, bad stats, and B, something more temporary.
If you're talking about things that have a physiological effect or you're doing something to the body, both things that you just mentioned, you are actually still doing something to the body. So acupuncture with an infrared laser, you are still putting an infrared laser on the body, so you are still going to locally heat something up. So you are still doing something. It's the question of, now, does what you're doing have any sort of plausible mechanism to do, or the effect that you attribute to it is a completely different question in my mind. And the answer is no, but I would just be careful about saying, trying to separate these things into, you are doing something physical to the body versus you are not doing something physical to the body, because in most cases, you can usually still point to you are sort of kind of doing something to the body. It's just the degree to which you're doing it, how much you're doing it, and whether then that actually has any relation to anything else. I was just rewatching a Penn and Teller episode, and it was a reflexologist hammering at someone's foot 400 times a minute. It's yeah, you're doing something, but whether or not you're going to cure acne from doing this is a completely separate question.
Thanks, Adam. We all know bad science sucks, and so does a vacuum. And the vacuum of space? Last week, as we turned off the mics, I had a question for the panel. If you were accelerating in a ship in space, and it suddenly stopped accelerating, would you feel it? That shifted into a discussion about simulating zero gravity or microgravity and space as a vacuum. And that led us to asking our resident astronomer if he had some time to come on the show and talk to us. He kindly said yes. Stuart is a senior research scientist who studies planetary geophysics. He's also the host of the Exposing Pseudoastronomy blog and podcast, which you can find at podcast.sjrdesign.net.
Great website.
You fit right in. So, Stuart, thanks for coming. We were first wondering, if you were in such a ship in space and it stopped accelerating, would you feel it?
So you would feel basically any change in acceleration, because that's when a force is acting on you. So if you're at a constant velocity, which velocity is both a speed and a direction, then you're not going to feel anything because everything is constant. But in order to change your velocity, you have to have a force applied to you. And as soon as that force is applied, that's going to cause an acceleration. That's either going to be an acceleration forward or backward or in a different direction, anything like that. And you're going to feel that because you have to in order to actually experience the acceleration, experience that change in your velocity. So yes, if you were in a spaceship in space and anything about your velocity changed, then you would feel it. Unless, of course, you had something crazy in Star Trek, like inertial dampeners, in which case you don't feel it because they didn't want to, have the people wear seatbelts.
Of course. That'd be so uncool. So just to picture this for our listeners, I'm in a spaceship in space. It's currently at rest, we'll say, not moving. We'll imagine that's true. Then thrusters kick in, accelerating us up to, pick a reasonable speed, 1,000 kilometers an hour for however long, doesn't really matter, 10 minutes. And then it stops. So initially, I am pushed against my chair, say, in the opposite direction of the thrust.
So the thrust is going to go forward. You want to stay at rest, so you are going to push effectively backwards. You're going to feel the chair pushing at you in the direction of motion. But whether or not you yourself are going to interpret that as pushing you forward or you pushing yourself backwards, I guess it's up to the individual. I mean, it's the same thing as you're in a car or you're on a roller coaster. What do you feel when you start? Do you feel yourself moving forward or do you feel yourself pushing backwards?
That's an excellent point. And I guess it was really gradual. You would barely notice it. But let's say it's fast enough to be noticeable. And so now we'll say I'm going to sit down because I'll be more comfortable if I'm being pushed hard enough backwards. Then the thrusters stop. Then what happens to me?
You'd be going at a constant velocity, assuming that there's no other force out there to change your velocity. So you would not feel anything. It would just be like we're doing right now. I assume that you are sitting in a comfortable or semi-comfortable chair, but you're on a spinning planet, and you are spinning or rotating or revolving, whatever, at a constant velocity, and therefore you don't feel it. You don't feel that motion at all. Now, if Planet X were to come by and throw a tractor beam on us and stop our rotation or change it, you would feel that. But as is, just like in a spaceship, as soon as you shut off those thrusters, you're going to be traveling at a constant velocity and you will not feel anything effectively.
Now, Stuart, wouldn't it be correct to say that because the Earth is spinning, I am feeling some effect of centrifugal force? It's just not as strong as the gravity?
Now we get into real forces and fake forces and other things that are a little bit more complicated for this segment. If people are interested in that, they can actually listen to my last podcast episode where I talked about Coriolis force and tides and got into the definition of all of these different reference frames and rotating forces and that kind of thing. But there are various forces at play, but at the moment, basically everything is zero on you, except for gravity itself pulling you downward. So you don't really feel any force acting upon you except for Earth's gravity pulling you down.
Interesting. So getting back to this ship and then segueing to microgravity, if I was in the spaceship and it's thrusting, the acceleration is fast enough and strong enough that I'm being pushed back and I'm then against my chair, as soon as it cuts, will I just start floating? Pretty much?
Yeah, pretty much, unless there's something bolting you down. And that's, yeah.
Seatbelt would be a good idea.
Seatbelt would be a good idea. Artificial gravity would be a good idea. Yeah, that kind of anything, really. But if there's no force acting upon you, you're not really going to change anything.
So to help us better understand all this, can you just elaborate a bit more in general about microgravity or zero gravity and how that comes about, either actually or artificially?
Yeah, so the idea of zero gravity is that there is simply no net gravitational force acting upon you, where net is the sum of everything. So if you were able to find a spot in space where every gravitational object, basically anything that it has any sort of mass, was equally distributed around you, then you would feel zero net gravity. The idea of microgravity is that we can't really negate every single thing. And so even when we go into space, there's always going to be some net gravitational pull upon us. So the astronauts in the International Space Station right now, effectively, even if you are able to cancel out all effects of gravity due to Earth, for example, you're still going to have some effect of gravity from the moon. You're going to have some pull of gravity from the sun that's going to be a little more or a little less, depending on which side of Earth you're on. You're going to have a pull from, say, Pluto or Jupiter. And so we don't really refer to a environment in space as zero G or zero gravity because there is always going to be a teeny tiny gravitational pull from something that we haven't really factored in. With that said, the idea that astronauts in space or in the International Space Station or a space shuttle or a Soyuz capsule, whatever, experienced no gravity is not true. In fact, they're very close to Earth relative to Earth's size. So I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but I think the number is somewhere around 300 to 400 miles, which is, divide that by 0.6 to get kilometers. They're about that high up, but the Earth's radius is about 6,378 kilometers or so. Love how I mix my units, which means that they are maybe an additional 10% away from the center of the planet, and so they're still going to experience a lot of the gravitational pull from Earth. The idea that the astronauts standing up there in the ISS experience no gravitational pull from Earth is completely wrong. The reason, though, that they experience a microgravity environment is because the International Space Station is falling at the speed of the gravitational acceleration. The idea behind this is that the way that you are experiencing or you feel the force from gravity. Actually, let's just go back to your spaceship example. So if you are at rest and then you fire up the thrusters and you are going to be vaulted, we'll say, in a forward direction, the only reason you feel something is because the seat that you're sitting in is pushing against you and you're pushing against it. This is just Newton's second law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So you are pushing against the seat and the seat's pushing against you, and that's the only reason that you actually feel that force, that acceleration. Same thing with Earth, with gravity. The only reason I feel gravity on Earth is because my butt is sitting in a chair that's pushing up against me as I'm trying to be pulled to the center of the planet. If a hole were to open up underneath me and the chair were to go into free fall and me along with it, there is no longer anything pushing up against me. And so effectively, I would not feel gravity. And the same thing goes for the International Space Station. It is falling downwards with the same acceleration as the force of gravity. And so with the ground effectively constantly falling out from under them, the astronauts experience near weightlessness. And so that's really the idea of microgravity.
So they're falling towards the Earth, they just keep missing it?
Right. So this is the idea of, let's take 3 people throwing a ball horizontally. So if you take, say, Adam's newborn infant, and you give them a ball, and they throw the ball horizontally, it might go a few centimeters before it hits the ground. Then, if you were to give me the ball, and I were to throw it horizontally, it may go a few meters before it hits the ground. And in fact, if I were to throw the ball at the same starting position above the ground as the infant, then it would take the exact same amount of time to hit the ground as it did from the infant, because it's still experiencing gravity. It still has to travel the same vertical distance. It's just because of that initial velocity that I put into it in a horizontal distance, it can go farther before it hits the ground. Now, if we were to take Superman or Dean Cain or his alter ego, who's on the podcast, and have him throw the ball, he would be able to throw the ball even farther than I can. And he might just be able to throw the ball so fast in a horizontal direction that by the time gravity acts on it enough to pull it to the ground where he started, the ground would have fallen out from under him due to the curvature of the planet. And so that's what's going on with the ISS. It's being pulled down effectively at the rate of gravity, but it's also moving in a horizontal direction, basically across the planet's surface at a speed fast enough to keep it from getting any closer to the planet. With that said, pedantics who are listening to this might say, well, that's not entirely correct because there's atmospheric drag, which is slightly slowing it down, which means that the International Space Station is slightly decaying in its orbit, which is why the space shuttle, every time that they docked with the ISS, they basically fired the thrusters and pushed it back up to a higher orbit. But for all intents and purposes for this discussion, that's what's going on.
That's interesting. And you mentioned the atmosphere, which made me think of your analogy of if your chair disappeared and you just fell. I think it's a bit different being in the space station because you're contained within a unit. And I was thinking of my skydiving days where, because of the force of the air, it really does feel like you're falling in a way that's not weightlessness. Mm-hmm.
And you would also hit a terminal velocity, which is where the air is effectively dense enough that you cannot fall any faster. It's preventing you from falling any faster.
And now strap yourselves in for some stickiness. Duct tape. I'm pretty sure most people have heard of duct tape, that gray sticky tape that has fabric on one side and has adhesive on the other, even some mistakenly calling it duct tape, which of course is my VHS compilation of Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Duct tape is extremely popular, and people seem to use it in all sorts of things, from cars to appliances to humans.
They even used it on the moon.
It's been used in various space missions as well, yes.
Wow, there you go.
I've even seen duct tape wallets. Given that it is called duct tape, it would seem to be a safe bet that it is good to use on ducts. But is this true? Here at TRC, no topic is too sticky to explore, so let's investigate. Years ago, Max Sherman and Ian Walker of the Department of Energy's Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory were testing various sealing materials, like duct tape, clear tape, foil back tape, and an aerosol sealant that is injected under conditions simulating those in real heating, venting, and air conditioning systems, otherwise known as HVAC for the heating, venting, and air conditioning. So I'll refer to it as HVAC from now on. Mm-hmm. Sherman and Walker devised an aging test to mimic the seasons by having various joints fit into a larger structure with the ability to have gaps, so that each joint can be sealed with a different product but tested at the same time. And here's a quote. Hot air at 75 degrees Celsius, about 167 degrees Fahrenheit, is forced through 4 of the ducts, because there were 8, and cold air at 12 degrees Celsius, or 53 degrees Fahrenheit, through the other 4. The hot and cold air flows are alternated every 5 minutes. Although the industry recommends that some tape products be assisted by collars or clamps, those are rarely used in the field and were not used in the accelerated testing of the sealants. Real-world conditions. Sherman and Walker also performed a bake test in which the sample joints were baked at temperatures of 140 to 187 degrees Fahrenheit, 60 to 75 degrees Celsius. Now, they had 8 joints, so if you can try to picture some sort of spider-like thing, and they're being sealed in different ways, and that's how they're testing this, in the broad sense you're trying to picture something in your mind. Well, what did they find? And here's a quote. Only 1 duct tape product survived 3 months of the aging test. 11 failed within days. Some fell right off the joint. Clear tapes, foil back tapes, mastics, and aerosol sealants, although they lack strength, formed good seals for the duration. While 5 duct tape products survived the baking test, in some cases this was because the backing separated from the glue and then fortunately just happened to slide over the holes, plugging them and baked shut again. In both kinds of the tests, duct tapes, the majority of the products that were tested, were the only sealants that failed. So duct tape is not good for ducts. Now, in case you're wondering where this word came from, it is actually called duct tape or not, and there seemed to be some long Wikipedia article about this. Etymologist Jan Freeman looked into it and said that there's no good evidence to support the idea that duct tape was originally called duct tape. Duct tape is not made from duct tape, and there's no known primary source of evidence that originally was referring to it as duct tape. Freeman found the earliest usage of duct tape was in 1960, and it wasn't really popularized until the 1980s, when there was a Duck brand of duct tape became really successful, which is one of the main reasons people call it duct tape. So duct tape, this gray tape, well, it comes in a variety of colors and sizes, of course, but we mainly know it as the gray tape here, is used in many, many places in many ways, but don't use it on your ducts. I would say that it was a great show that we had. Thank you, dear listeners. Adam explored the realm of Justin Trudeau, Science Prime Minister, doing something not so sciencey with cupping. It seems like you could do this, but there's not any good evidence to suggest you should do this at this moment. Our good old astronomer friend, Stuart Robbins, answered many a question about energy, gravity, vacuums, and virtual particles, stuck in there for good measure just in case. And I explored the realm of duct tape, which is sticky and wonderful for all your needs except ducks and probably many other things you shouldn't use it for. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cupboids.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
Remember, kids, science doesn't suck, it blows.
Thanks for being here, Stuart.
Thanks, Stuart. And if you want to follow more about Stuart's happenings, try the Exposing Pseudo-Astronomy blog and podcast.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at @TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
Adam is going to look into Justin Stewart and cupping.
Justin Stewart.
Who's Justin Stewart?
Even mean?
Damn it.
Is that a real person? Is that like your cousin?
You know what?
Like,
And I had such confidence that only when you said it back to me, I'm like, that's so wrong. It would seem to be a safe bet that it's good to use on ducts. This is going to be tricky. On ducts. Let's do that once more.
So, Darren, that was a wonderful segment. What would you say would the summary be?